One day while exploring near Seneca Rocks, we noticed something new. Something strange. What is that? Creeping closer, we can zoom in for a better view, and it appears to be the remains of some sort of bat. Or wait, is that a Scorch Beast? Whatever it is, it's pinned by something to the side of Seneca Rocks. What are those, porcupine quills? Must have been a huge porcupine. It's hard to tell from way down here. So to get a better view, we can climb to the pinnacle of Seneca Rocks to the point directly above this massive creature. And it's here we realize the significance of what we've just found. This is no Scorch Beast. This is a bird. It's covered in black and gray feathers. It has the head and beak of a turkey or a vulture. It has a huge wingspan, spanning dozens of feet. And these are feathered wings, not wings made of stretchy bat skin. This creature has talons and is stuck to the side of these rocks with giant metal spikes. There's a lot to unpack here, starting with what exactly is this thing? I've read some rumors that this is just an Easter egg. It doesn't have any real significance within the lore of the world. This creature was just a previous version of what we now know as the Scorch Beast. Bethesda went through many different iterations of the Scorch Beast before finally deciding upon the one that we got in the game. This was a previous one that they toyed with for a while, but ultimately decided that it wasn't a good fit for the game. But these bones still existed in the game files, and so they thought for fun, hey, with Wastelanders coming out, let's tack it to the side of Seneca Rocks. That's an interesting theory, but I don't think it's true. First of all, the lore behind the Scorch Beast is pretty well developed. Numerous characters from numerous factions describe the Scorch Beast as a bat-like creature. That's a ton of recorded dialogue, written terminal entries that Bethesda would have had to change had this been a late development decision. No, I think they decided upon the lore of the Scorch Beast as being mutated from the bat pretty early in the development of Fallout 76, so it wouldn't make sense that an early prototype of the Scorch Beast had a beak, and feathers, and talons. No, I don't think this was some unused asset buried in the game files that they stuck to the side of Seneca Rocks on a lark. No, I think this was intentional. This was crafted specifically for the Wastelanders release, so there was intention behind this. It must be based on something. There are a couple of possibilities. It could be based on the Piazza Bird. We talked in depth about the Piazza Bird in my video on the Snallygaster. For some have said that the Snallygaster itself may be based on the pre-European Native American story of the Piazza Bird. You can watch my video on the Snallygaster for more about the Piazza Bird. One of the strongest connections for what we find on the side of Seneca Rocks with the Piazza Bird is that the original Piazza Bird mural was found on cliff sides overlooking the Mississippi River. And just like this mural was permanently affixed to a cliffside, here we find a bird permanently pinned to a cliffside. The problem is that the Piazza Bird mural wasn't found in West Virginia. It was originally found on the side of Limestone Bluffs in Alton, Illinois. So we'd have to explain how a cryptid from Illinois got all the way here to West Virginia. Another possibility is that what we find here is the Thunderbird. The Thunderbird escapes the problems of the Piazza Bird in that the Thunderbird was found in the history and culture of Native Americans across North America. Indigenous people of the Pacific Northwest were more likely to depict the Thunderbird in their art, but it was also depicted by Native Americans all over North America. In Algonquian mythology, the Thunderbird controlled the heavens, while the underworld was controlled by an underwater panther, or great horned serpent. The Thunderbird created lightning by flapping its wings, and they punished people who broke moral rules and taboos. This is certainly a possibility, but it's far too general for my liking. It leaves a lot open to interpretation, and it's not focused specifically on West Virginia. Another possibility is that this is the Cumberland Dragon. The Cumberland Dragon was described in the December 4th, 1794 issue of the Caledonian Mercury newspaper. While exploring the Cumberland Mountains, which is part of the Appalachian Mountains, a detachment of mounted infantry spotted a smaller creature with 2 legs, standing upright, covered in black and brown scales. The scales were covered in yellow rings, and it had a fluffy, feathery white tuft at the top of its head. Most intimidatingly, it had large, fiery red eyes. It glared at the men for a moment, and it would not move out of the path, and so one of the infantrymen advanced and struck at it with his sword. But the Cumberland Dragon dodged the attack and jumped 8 feet into the air, spewing a thick red paste resembling blood out of its mouth, and then hopped away into a laurel thicket. They leapt into the thicket to try and find this creature, but they never did, and yet they never saw it fly away. With this story, we have just about the right location, the Cumberland Mountains, Appalachia, but the description of the creature doesn't quite fit. First of all, the one we find isn't covered in scales. And secondly, this one is much larger than the one in the story. Another problem is that we only have the one sighting from 1794 to rely upon, and it was only witnessed by a couple of men. I think the most likely explanation is that what we find here is the West Virginian Rock. And the story of the West Virginian Rock dates all the way back to early February 1895. The story is told to us on the Sunday, February 24th issue of the St. Louis Globe-Democrat newspaper. Page 7. A modern rock. One afternoon, 10-year-old Landy Junkins was asked by her mother to head to their neighbor's cabin to see if Mrs. Warwick, who lived there, was feeling any better. By 5 o'clock, when Landy hadn't returned home, her mother became nervous and sent her husband to go look for her. But when her husband, Dan Junkins, arrived at the Warwick cabin, he learned that his daughter never arrived there. Her father, Dan Junkins, was an experienced hunter and set off into the woods with some neighbors to look for young Landy. It was February. Snow covered the ground, and soon they spotted the clear tracks of a young girl. The hunters followed the tracks to within a mile of the Warnicks' cabin. They followed the tracks through the woods and into a clearing. Lundy had stopped suddenly. Then she started walking backwards. After walking backwards for a few paces, she turned around and ran in the opposite direction. But then the footprints turned right and then turned left and began to circle around as if she was trying to dodge something. But then, in the middle of this chaos, the footprints simply vanished. By now it was dark, and the hunters couldn't see any more. They returned home to give Landy's mother the sad news. The next day, many more in the area volunteered to help search for her, but they also were unsuccessful. They never found the young girl, and they were never able to explain her disappearance. But then, a few days later, noted bear hunter Peter Swadley was hunting a bear in the woods with his dog named Gunner. They had been hunting this bear for some time after spotting him on several occasions. After climbing through some laurel on a mountainside, Peter and Gunner emerged into a little clearing. But then suddenly, he heard a scream, which he said was louder than that of a panther. Then, a large feathered creature swooped down upon him and dug into his flesh with his talons, trying to carry off this grown man. The creature tore his coat to shreds, and Peter grappled with the beast in the snow. He lost his rifle. He lost his knife. He was fighting this creature with his bare hands, and he wasn't doing well. The creature sliced him all over his back and body. Part of his scalp above his left eye was torn away. But then Gunner pounced upon the creature. This distracted the creature, who released Peter, but then, with one swipe of his talons, completely disemboweled the dog. The creature then picked up the corpse and flew away into the mountains. Even though he was bleeding profusely, he managed to stagger back into town. People thought that surely he had been attacked by an eagle. But this was no eagle, said Peter, for on several occasions the strength of this creature was able to lift him from the earth. It was only through immense effort that he managed to pull himself back to the ground. A few days later, County Deputy Sheriff Rube Nahizer was hunting deer with his son Hans early one Thursday morning. They hadn't been hunting for more than a few hours when they came upon the tracks of a doe and a fawn. They were hunting near Spruce Creek, at the foot of the Owlhead Mountains. Rube and his son followed the tracks into a thick forest of hemlocks. The hemlocks were growing so large and so thick that even though this was still morning, it got so dark in the forest that the trail became hard to see. But Rube knew the area well, and even if they lost the trail, they could still make it out. As they headed towards the edge of the forest, they heard a terrible racket ahead of them. Ear-splitting screams, snapping branches, and breaking bones. They emerged from the forest into a clear spot, whereupon they saw the doe and the fawn that they had been tracking fighting for their lives with a giant bird. The bird was harassing them, pouncing on one, then pouncing on the other. The doe was desperately trying to protect its fawn, but the father and son hunters were so astonished by the immense size of this bird that they just stood there in shock. The bird swooped up into the air 50 or 60 feet, then dive-bombed the fawn, fastening its talons into the fawn's body, and then with apparent ease, skipping back up into the sky. At this point, Rube had recovered from his shock, took aim with his rifle, and fired. But he either missed the winged creature or his bullets had no effect. They watched helpless as this giant creature flew away with a fawn in its talons. The doe stood alone in the snow, dazed. As the men approached, it didn't try to flee, but upon inspecting the doe, the hunters discovered that the creature had gouged out its eyes. In an act of mercy, Rube cut the throat of the doe to put it out of its misery. A few days later, sheep herdsman Hans Hardick was keeping his sheep in a small bark-lined shack through the winter. Even though it was lined with bark, it was still a fully intact shed. Its only entrance was the front door, and you had to have hands to open that. One day, Hans went to go feed his sheep in the shack, only to find one of them missing. The other sheep seemed to be frightened, huddled together in a corner of the shed. Wool was scattered all over the place, and there was a hole in the roof, as if something had broken through. Upon inspecting the edges of the hole, Hans discovered bits and pieces of snagged wool. Clearly, one of the sheep had been pulled through this hole in the roof. But what puzzled Hans is that he couldn't find any tracks around the shed. It was in the middle of February. There was snow everywhere. The door was still shut. There were no tracks, and yet something pulled a sheep through a hole in the roof of his shed. And there were many stories like these that circulated through West Virginia during the winter of 1895. So much so that mothers, remembering the fate of the poor Junkins girl, kept their children inside. Hunters, forced to hunt in this horrid winter, would keep a mindful eye at the skies whenever they entered a clearing. Authorities believe that it must have been the West Virginian rock that abducted the little girl and took her to its roost at the top of nearby Snaggletooth Knob, a mountainous peak with cliff faces that overlapped each other to such an extent that it resembled snaggled teeth. A peak not unlike Seneca Rocks in Appalachia. I believe what we see here is the remains of the West Virginian rock, now returned, for some reason, to Appalachia. But I think the most startling discovery here is how it's pinned to these rocks. It is skewered by these metal poles, and these metal poles are wrapped in barbed wire. These are not natural. These were made by men. Could raiders have done this? Maybe, but how? By firing these harpoons with a giant spiked and barbed wired harpoon gun? If so, the raiders at Crater haven't talked about it. The Free Radicals haven't talked about it. None of the raiders in Appalachia have anything to say about this giant creature. The scene almost conjures up an image from a black and white monster movie. Perhaps this West Virginia rock was skewered by some titan in an epic battle that took place here at Seneca Rocks. Perhaps this titan just picked up some poles at a nearby raider camp and used them as weapons against the fearsome beast. If so, we now have some other titan we've got to contend with, but we find no other trace of him. No other cryptid could have done this. It takes hands to wield these spikes in battle against the rock. Another problem is how high this creature has been pinned to the side of Seneca Rocks. Could a throng of super mutants have killed a bird of this size? Maybe, but how then would they have climbed the side of this cliff face to pin it to the rocks? It's just so far up here. Nothing really could reach this far up, except for maybe a vertibird. But who uses the vertibirds? Pre-war America, sure, but they're all dead. There is the Brotherhood, but the Brotherhood, they all died with Lizzie Taggarty. And yet, recently, we've picked up 2 new radio broadcasts in Appalachia. The first is called Brotherhood Broadcast.
Brotherhood Appalachia en route Atlas morning occupying the yard coming protection supplies Atlas cooperation Appalachia help First Expeditionary Force Brotherhood defeat.
It's severely garbled, but we can pick out a few words. Brotherhood, Atlas, en route, Appalachia, coming, protection, cooperation, help, First Expeditionary Force, repeat. So the Brotherhood is still around, and it sounds like they're coming back? But why? They're interested in super mutants and technology, not cryptids. But then, appearing alongside this broadcast, and at the same time, we find a second new one called Encrypted Broadcast.
3 begin.
We hear the words 3 begin, and then some sort of garbled chirping sound. Clearly, it's been encrypted. It chirps loudly for a while. Then it chirps more quietly. And then we hear a voice.
3 end.
3 end. Perhaps this encrypted broadcast is also from the Brotherhood of Steel, and perhaps there's a hidden message here. Maybe it's a pun. Maybe this encrypted broadcast has something to do with cryptids? Encrypted? Cryptids, right? Now, data miners have already decrypted this message and some others, and from what I gather, it doesn't have anything to do with cryptids. The message is basically communication between Maxon at Lost Hills and an expeditionary force sent here to secure Atlas. Atlas, well, clearly that's the Atlas Observatory. Heading to the Atlas Observatory, we can get ready to destroy all of these horrible robots that we know are waiting for us outside. But when we get there, we find a bunch of, construction robots. And they're not hostile. They're hard at work here. And taking a look at what they are working on, it looks like they're repairing this landing pad. This vertibird landing pad. Nearby, we find a brand new tent that we've never seen before. And inside on a table, we find a new note, back in a bit. To anybody who comes by, I had to leave for a bit to find more spare parts for the bots. I'll be back soon if you're interested in what we are doing here. This place is going to be amazing when we are done. I hope you'll help us. I've sealed up the place, so if you're looking to bust in and have a look around, sorry to disappoint. And please don't touch my stuff while I'm gone. I can't exactly stop you, but you don't have to be a jerk either. Russell Dorsey. Sure enough, heading to the main door of Atlas Observatory, it's all boarded up. We can't get inside anymore. Leaping atop the observatory, we find another tent up here, but this one is just filled in with medical supplies. Could this Russell Dorsey be a member of the Brotherhood of Steel? Could the Brotherhood be coming back to Appalachia and turning the Atlas Observatory into a new fortress? And this, I think, could connect to the West Virginian Rock because the Atlas Observatory is just north of Seneca Rocks, where we find the giant bird. Could the Brotherhood of Steel, using vertibirds and some sort of harpoon gun, have been responsible for pinning this rock to the side of Seneca Rocks? I can't think of any other explanation, though I must admit that this is just a theory. One of what I think are probably thousands of fan theories. I would love to hear yours. Let me know your thoughts about this fascinating find in the comments section below. I publish new Fallout videos each and every week on my channel, so if you don't want to miss my next one, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. If you have already, but you still feel like you're missing out on YouTube notifications, consider following me on Twitter at Oxhorn. I update Twitter manually with every new piece of content that I publish. I've got a shirt shop with completely unique designs that you can't find anywhere else. My designs come on shirts in a variety of men's, women's, and children's sizes, and in a wide array of colors. You can find them on other products as well, like smartphone cases, pillows, posters, mugs, stickers, prints, etc. So if interested, you can find a link to my shop in the description below, or you can click here. If you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming a patron on Patreon or a member here on YouTube. YouTube members and patrons on Patreon are becoming increasingly important as YouTube continues to make platform changes that make the future of YouTube monetization uncertain. So to all my YouTube members and my patrons on Patreon, you have my sincerest thanks. I couldn't do this without you. But more than anything, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with more brand new videos.